Hi, everyone. Welcome to Civics Class for Radicals 2. Today we're going to be talking about cities and counties, organizing across urban and rural PA. So at our first class, we talked a little bit about the national government and how that's set up. And we also talked about the Marxist methodology that we're trying to get across, that there are problems in our society. The things that we have right now are not built to take care of the problems that we're all facing. We have to analyze what we have and figure out a way forward. And for this discussion, we're going to be doing that in the context of the state of Pennsylvania. So for today's discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of PA to get a sense of why things got the way they are. We're going to talk a little bit about federalism and how many governments there are just floating around. Because, like we talked about last week, the government isn't the same thing as the state, and what we might think of as the state isn't the same as the state of Pennsylvania. So, a little bit to disentangle there. We're going to talk about specifically how the territory of Pennsylvania is set up and how its government is set up into three branches. And then when we start talking about the way forward and where we're at, we're going to talk a little bit about non-government actors across the state of PA and sort of the poles of the way forward out of this situation that we're in. And finally, we're going to wrap up talking a little bit about town and country. And by the way, feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions or want to bring anything up to the group. Brian called me our instructor, but I want to push back against that. Uh, I don't like to think that I'm instructing any of us in a particular way, but this is like a collective learning thing. And if there's any way that we can be better spatially situated in this room, say something. If there's something I'm missing in the presentation, say something. If there's something everyone needs to know that's in your head, throw it out there. Okay, great. We're going to get started. So, in terms of the early history of Pennsylvania. Hi. Of course, America wasn't always, the United States of America wasn't always here. Before the colonists, there were a lot of different people here for many thousands of years, about 10,000 of them. Here are some of the regions that people were inhabiting before colonization. And on this side is the original allotment of land that William Penn owned and all of the stuff that his family ended up getting by the 1700s, by the end of the 1700s. In terms of the pre-colonial history, like I said, these are some of the groups who lived here and still live here, their descendants. Sorry. The first contact that some of these people had was in the 1500s with European colonists from Dutchland. Is it called Dutchland? Denmark? The Dutch? Where are the Dutch from? I'm sorry. The Netherlands. Thank you. The Netherlands, that one. Colonists from the Netherlands and Sweden came here in the late 1400s, early 1500s. Their colonial enterprises did not succeed until the English came here, which is our second point on Quaker colonization. The first guy who came here, not the first guy who came here, that's not true, obviously, but okay. 1680s, the King of England owes a big debt to William Penn's father. William Penn is a Quaker. The Quakers aren't super tolerated in England. And so William Penn basically cashes in his favor, gets 45,000 square miles of what currently constitutes Pennsylvania as his right to colonize, and sets up a colonial government here. The way he set up the colonial government was pretty similar to how it had been set up in England, but not exactly the same. He was the governor, the proprietor of the colony, and that meant that he personally owned any of the land that he managed to wrest out of the hands of the people who were living here. He set up a upper house that had up to 72 other rich guys who would write laws or govern in his absence. And they also had a lower house of about 200 people who came from the common classes who would accept or reject laws that that upper house had written. And this is actually the first colonial government like style that catches on in other colonial governments. And because we're talking about the early 1700s to mid 1700s, a lot of these colonial projects aren't super linked up yet. And they start developing similar but different, what Alexander Hamilton called experiments in all of these different states. But they grew up with their own interests, and they grew up with these ruling families essentially who were fighting with each other to get the most out of what had been given to them by the King of England. So by the time William Penn dies and the American Revolution is starting to come around, William Penn has 3 kids, and excuse my language, they're all dickheads. They're all like linen merchants and like finance guys. They're shipping things from England to the colonies and trying to get their cash in. Their family is real strapped for cash back home. And because this entire territory up to here, approximately, all of this belonged to 3 guys by the legal right that the colonial government had given themselves. They started taking over not just like the claim to the land, but like the actual, they started trying to put people on so that they could get economic gain from not just saying we own that, but actually being like, okay, let's do something. And so this guy's 3 sons went, and I don't know if you can see, but it's like it's the 1680s, 1730s. So this is like 50 years after it was established. And then 50 years after that, we're all the way out. As we talked a little bit about last week, the American Revolution is a much more complicated series of events than is usually portrayed in the American education system. But the main part of it that I want to get at here is that, sorry, I'm looking through my notes. Yes, sorry, that was the thing that I wanted to say. The British government basically had said in the proclamation of 1787 that no colonists were allowed west of this line in the entire what is now the United States. The colonists say, no, we actually want to be able to go past that line. We want to go settle out in the West. We want to go and kill people and take their land and XYZ. So the American Revolution happens in part because the colonists are rebelling against that Proclamation Act and want to keep expanding. The continued genocide still goes on to this day. And this is one of the other main things that I'm trying to have us internalize, is that like the way that these political legal forms come about to establish domination continue to do that, and it makes those problems worse. And it doesn't just resolve itself or go away. The way that this government, this colony was set up, expanded, went to all of the other colonies basically, and now even today, sorry, I'm putting the thought out. The federal government basically says anything that we pushed you out of and then handed back to you, what they call the reservation system, is basically the federal government saying we're your landlord and you can stay on it as long as we say you can stay on it. And throughout even the last 20 years, when everyone is trying to say, either trying to forget about it or say that they're on the right side of history, these places that hadn't been like people's ancestral home for 10,000 years, but it resettled there after European destruction came to their people. I'm sorry, I'll be particular. There are no federally or state recognized tribes or nations in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania refuses to do. People still live here. People never left. People came back or are trying to come back, and they will not recognize them. New Jersey had 3 federally recognized tribes, 2 reservations, which had been for at least 100 plus years, like cultural and spiritual centers and population centers, took it away and turned it into a state park. They're not allowed to be there on, I think it's the Rokukan Reservation in North Jersey. Anyways, because the United States says that it owns all of this land, and because land and private property is central to the Constitution, and therefore to each of the state constitutions, and sometimes the other way around, because some of these state governments came about before the federal government, this process of expropriation and so-called primitive accumulation continues to happen. People's land rights are still being taken away. People's water rights are still being taken away. And it's like some of the same old playbooks. Okay, great. The main themes I wanted to get out of this slide: private property, political legal forms of economic domination. That means like coming up with the judiciary, coming up with the legislature to basically say, okay, it's okay for us to do this and we're going to keep doing it. And then the so-called primitive accumulation of that process of violent taking of capital in the form of land, particularly. Okay, great. Going to move on to the next slide. Any questions? Good. So, how did PA's government come about? I already talked about that a little bit. William Penn, governor, 2 houses. Everyone's like, great, that looks like it's working okay, especially with the element of religious tolerance that the Quakers brought with them. All of that went away after William Penn died, basically, and it turned into just another like conquering little polity. But then we get to the American Revolution, and we start having to talk about, and we talked about this 2 weeks ago at our first session, the Articles of Confederation. I'm not going to go back into it in super detail, but we can talk about it later. The Articles of Confederation basically looked at those 13 colonies and said, okay, how do we make this work as one country? And their solution was, we're going to have all of these state governments that grew up apart from each other try to work amongst one another and figure it out. And the central government isn't going to be able to raise an army or collect taxes. And that went very poorly for that system of governance. That was basically the libertarian dream. You know, states' rights, they got it and it failed in the first instance. And maybe that's a historical question of communication or networking or logistics or whatever. But anyways, the answer that Hamilton and some other people had was federalism. And there were movements for and against this. But this is how we got to the point where we're at. I put this picture here because I thought it was very funny that whenever I looked up federalism, it just gave me food images because that's the only way that they can teach this. So this diagram is trying to explain federalism. In the past, it was layer cake federalism. Programs and authority are clearly divided among the national, state, and local governments. Present, marble cake federalism. Programs and authority are mixed among the national, state, and local governments. Okay, that is kind of true, but it's a funny way to put it. Okay, anyways, what the Federalists say is we need a strong central government that can collect taxes, strips the right of like foreign policy and interstate commerce away from each individual state. We need to be able to have one national currency. We need to be able to put down rebellions. All of these things are what the U.S. government was considering when it adopted the U.S. Constitution in 1776 and established formally the United States of America in like 1778 or whatever. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So that's how the federalism model emerged. And then we can talk about what does federalism look like today? Unfortunately, this is what federalism looks like today. When federalism was first conceived, and it was like these 13 states, each of which had like two urban centers, and like everyone else lived out in the middle of nowhere and farmed for the rest of their lives. Like it worked okay. And especially because, as you can see on the East Coast, and if you think about like the geography of it, and you think about the time frame that it was happening in, early settlement and the establishment of like a lot of old style colonial to like early 1800s towns, they were founded based on like this river stops here and like we're going into this place and like we're nestled in this little mountain, and they're constantly trying to spread west, which creates all of these messy little catchments. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I actually explained this. This map is of all of the counties in the United States. And each county is a separate government that has powers shared by, enumerated to, and separate from the federal government and the state government. And this is actually key to understanding where we're at and how we get out. Because it's like one of those things that we don't really want to think about, or if we think about it, we think about it only in terms of like, I live in Philadelphia, and that means I deal with Philadelphia issues. Or like, I live in a small town and I'm trying to deal with my small town issues. And for a time, that's how politics has kind of worked in the United States, where like you can grease people's palms or whatever. But we're at a point in the centralization of the economy where we just can't do that anymore. All of these towns, and you know, I'm from the East Coast. I'm speaking about the East Coast a lot. Sorry, I don't know about anything out here. Um, I don't know what goes on out there. You think about I'm sorry, I'm getting way ahead. So I'm going to talk about federalism.
Just wanted to add to the point about counties that like the powers that they're given vary state to state. So like what we're dealing here with in Pennsylvania is going to be very different than what like New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, everyone else is dealing with, just because of that alone. And then also kind of the makeup of counties is different state to state as well. Some states like Pennsylvania, the county is divided, like all 100% of the land area is divided into different municipalities. But in other states, it'll be there's like unincorporated areas which are not a part of the county. They have, so there's like an interplay of power that's really different state to state. But yeah, thank you.
I actually do not know what the, yeah, it's just a bunch of counties. And I guess if we want to look at it spatially, a lot of little counties out here, a few big counties out here, and that reflects patterns of settlement, land surveying usage, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the things on this side of the country are based off of geographical features, and in Pennsylvania particularly, which we're going to get to in a second, we'll talk about that. But okay, sorry. Did we talk about federal government, outside of state things, states, inside state things, local governments get to take care of themselves? That's basically how it is. Okay. So let's talk a second about how Pennsylvania is organized. This is the political arrangement here for the state. We have an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, similar to the national setup. And their basic functions are write and pass bills. The executive passes them or vetoes them. The executive drafts the budget. Legislature passes the budget. The executive, there's a very famous Karl Marx quote that basically says the executive of the modern capitalist state is like an executive of the affairs of the whole class. Basically, our governor is around to, thank you, Brian. Our governor is around to make sure that things keep running smoothly. They're empowered to, the big thing is like emergency powers, right? They have the ability to write governor, I'm sorry, losing the term, the equivalent to like executive orders for their state. They can call in the National Guard if people are getting too uppity. We saw in 2020. Actually, I want to ask you all a question. If anyone can think of some ways that this governmental form is set up, why is it set up this way? Like, what is it aimed at achieving or stabilizing or disrupting? What's up, Albert? Very good points. Yeah, if you want to speak into the, or if you want to speak, let me know and I'll give you the mic because this is how it's recording on the thing.
Yeah, just adding to Casey's point about how the governor has the power to like start emergency orders and things like that. They also have the power to not continue or end emergency orders. So, the governor has the blanket ability to say, for example, that COVID is over or not.
Another one that's really huge, turns out we have two wireless mics. Another thing that's huge, especially in the judiciary, and this isn't just a Pennsylvania problem, but like the plea, sorry. Okay. The plea bargain has taken over in place of just like having trials in a lot of places. A lot of people will just straight up get told, like, you're going to do 30, say you did it, and maybe you'll get 5. And there is no trial, there is no due process. People get locked up and sent to prison. And part of the way that is facilitated is this hierarchical judicial structure where in the bottom courts in Pennsylvania in particular, everything goes through the court, the minor courts at the bottom, the district and magisterial courts, and I'm stuck. I mean, there's a big problem with how the judiciary and its relation to private property even conceptualizes crime and then locks people up based on like you did property damage. We're not actually going to assess why you did it, but you did it and now you're going to jail. Okay. Albert, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just to expand on what Casey just said there, crime is like a big social construction, right? Where it's like crime that occurs from capitalists down to the regular people, that's not regarded as a crime, right? Like wage theft, you're not going to go to jail for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of your employee wages. But you steal $20 from your employer, you could land yourself in jail. And then I just wanted to kind of ask, because this seems very like top down and commandist, where the highest part of the pyramid, be it the federal government, be it the Supreme Court, be it federal legislatures or whatever, seem to have massive amounts of power to basically just dictate what the lower levels of society do. But at the same time, we see that there's like a weird trap. You think like the logical conclusion is to have a little bit more power at the bottom, which is of course what we stand for. Why is it though that the most reactionary right supports things like states' rights, right? And what's their angle there for kind of subverting this kind of bottoms up mode of governance or mode of accountability? Like how What's the dynamic there?
Anyone want to take a crack at that? Anyone want to think about that a little bit? Chew on that? Shane? Shane in the house?
All right, so this is me taking a shot at it. I don't really have a like right answer. This is just what I'm thinking. Um, but I think a lot of the right wing is in favor of states' rights because the right wing has a lot more power in like local and state governments than it does in the federal government. Like in terms of think about if you look at electoral maps, you'll see if you break it down by county, there's like a whole sea of red throughout like most of the country. Now these counties are inhabited by like 12 people or whatever, but they, have if basically the farther down you break the US, the more of an opportunity it creates for the right wing to intervene and implement policies. And like say for example, like abortion was, the Dobbs decision, overturned abortion as a right. And immediately like multiple states just like flat out outlawed abortion. So like, you know, getting like states' rights and having a powerful state government allows the right wing to implement some of its policies. And even if it's not like throughout the entire country, it's like in those places that they control.
One of the things that came to my mind thinking about this also was the SB 106 bill that they were trying to pass last year after Dobbs, which was like a blatant slap in the face against the state constitution. It's like a slap in the face against democratic interests in Pennsylvania. It was a slap in the face to everyone who was targeted by that bill. And I'll say what the bill was. It was to both require voter ID and say that there was no state constitutional right to funding for abortion. And is there a third component? I don't think there was a third component in the bill, but the really disgusting part of it was that they like waited until like midnight to pass it through the Senate at like the last night of the session or whatever, and then tried to still get it through. It did not get through, thankfully, but I do want to bring to our attention something that Albert said or brought up, which is the checks and balances idea that we're always taught in our fourth grade civics class or whatever. Just obviously does not exist in real life. Like I think it's just got to be said. It just does not exist at this point. Like there are some people who are trying to maintain the image that it does exist, but when you have the Supreme Court of the United States like saying Congress doesn't have any right to tell us that we have to have ethics or like I mean the collusion that happens between judiciary and rich interests who also have lobbyists who go every week to the legislature and so on and so forth. uh in reality it just doesn't exist. Okay, great. So any other thoughts on this? Cool. Not too much more to say about the state government itself. Sorry. I did just want to highlight here that these are some of the affairs of state that they take care of. The way that these are dispersed throughout the state, the way that the infrastructure is set up is very, sorry, I got someone joining. Admits. Great. The way that Okay, I'm gonna go back to the first slide and show you. I'm gonna show you the example that I have that I should have put on this slide. So we talked about how the executive exists. In the executive branch of the government, there are some agencies which they can appoint heads to. Some of the agencies I showed you on that slide. This is one of them, which is the Pennsylvania Health Department of Health. Sorry, Pennsylvania Department of Health. What this map is showing are the 6 regions of the state health department. As you can see, sorry, that's not how I'm going to explain it. Okay. State of Pennsylvania, 6 different regions. There are county health departments, which means the county itself takes care of that function of government in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 counties. So this entire area is governed by one body that has offices in each of these places. And our Southeast district, the particular problem here is that, for instance, during the COVID pandemic, because this is such a fragmented and disunified system, for issues that are of social interest, like public health, where we want to get everyone on the same page and have people healthy and like coordinated to be able to take care of the problem that we're facing, was unable to happen. And this is because Delaware County didn't have its own health department. They relied on the state health department to try and hook them up with vaccines and testing, or if not the state, the nonprofits. And there ended up being about 21 different applications to try and get a vaccine or testing in the middle of the pandemic. But I don't know about anyone else in this room. I work in Delaware County every day, and I live in Philadelphia. In fact, there's a lot of people who live in Philadelphia County who go out to Delaware County every day, and that they aren't serviced in a way that makes sense for the situation. One is criminal, but 2, it just doesn't, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm belaboring the point. We have a hand in the back. I hope you get what I mean.
Okay, I just have a quick question about Southeast Pennsylvania. For reference, I just moved here, so I'm kind of confused about like all of the. It looks weird. Why is it 2 purple and a gray? Delaware County in Pennsylvania?
Delaware County in Pennsylvania. That is the most confusing part. Yes, so the ones in gray are able to administer their own local health departments. The ones in purple do not have the ability to do that, and it hinders their ability to take care of the problems that they're facing. And it's a side effect, like a downstream effect of this federalist system that we ended up with. Yes, so continuing on, that was my point about state departments. They're fragmented, disunited, and ineffective because of it. And in all of the situations where we actually need these agencies to do their stated job, most of the time they don't have funding, we don't have the infrastructure, we got to rely on public partner or private partners, or we got to, we got to go out there and do some consulting for a couple of years and make sure that we get the right issue or the right problem to the issue, when instead they could just hook people up with what they need.
Yeah, just wanted to add to this point. God, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So like another big aspect of this, I would say, is the like executive branch elections every 4 years in the state. And so a lot of these state agencies, they're like, all right, well, depending on the election, I don't know if I'm gonna have a job. Because like the when new people come in, they'll like just essentially replace all of the leadership at all the different agencies. So it's like the election cycle just plays into the ineffectiveness and like inability for these departments and like the government to just function in a logical and effective way.
Let's talk a little more about dysfunction. Our next slide is what is up with those governments? How did we do? How do we do this? This thing is a map of all of the different municipal boundaries in Pennsylvania. A municipality is a local government that is established through the state legislature. And local governments in Pennsylvania include counties, townships, boroughs, towns, cities, and school districts. School districts are not represented on this map. It's only the other kinds. But I don't know. Does anyone want to tell me what they think about this? I mean, just first impressions. I'm interested to know if anyone has any.
All right, so it's very finely subdivided, right? And it doesn't seem like it's logically divided between the counties that already did exist, right? It seems like there's, we already saw in the previous slide that the counties themselves are not able to manage their own affairs in a reasonable way. And so you'd wonder, like, if you divide that leadership up to an even smaller and more redundant scale, wouldn't that dysfunction just increase, right? So it looks like we have dysfunctional governance units inside dysfunctional governance units, all the way down to this incredibly fine scale, where you even have some municipalities fully enclosed by other municipalities, right? Like there's little black spots in there too. I don't know how many black spots there are. There might be. Okay. Yeah, so as other people are mentioning in the crowd, those little dots represent the town centers in the middle of a larger area. That kind of those areas tend to correspond with like the highest level of economic activity and the highest level of wealth concentration. And so basically we have this case where the most concentrated wealth in a municipality is basically carved up and separated from the rest of the municipality. And so there's like a colonial relationship where you have the best to do people in each municipality declaring their political interests as completely separate from the people around them.
And I think probably the perfect example of that is the case of Philadelphia, the only county city municipality in Pennsylvania, and the fact that the people who work in the suburbs live in Philadelphia, pay Philadelphia taxes. The people who own the businesses that people work at and eat at and live in Philadelphia, a lot of them live out in the counties and pay county taxes and pay county homeowners association fees or whatever. What's up, Brian?
Yeah. Another purpose, I think, that having these municipalities split up in the way that they are on that map serves is just like confusing the hell out of the citizenry, so that like if you have an issue in your town or something that you want to be addressed, it's increasingly complicated to find the correct agency or municipality that's going to address it, and which further leads to people's just sort of like disinvolvement with local politics or anything of that nature even further. And I think that's how they like it.
So on that note, a couple of the things that local jurisdictions can do are like, I'm sorry, I actually have to check the battery. Ooh. Sorry, battery issue. 1 sec. we might either miss the slideshow or the microphone. So I only have 2 ports on my computer. We're losing the microphone. Sorry. It's time for me to use my outdoor voice. 1 second. I'm so sorry. Okay, great. Can we all hear what I'm saying? Yes. Okay. Speak up a little more. Okay, great. I can do that. So local governments, what they're entitled to do outside of the powers that the federal government has and outside of the powers that the state government holds. Local governments can also collect taxes, just like those other 2 layers. They can plan development of the lands that's under their jurisdiction. They have to take care of waste management and sewage. If they have police, they have to train them, which an interesting Pennsylvania specific issue is that, you know, we got all of these municipalities, about 50 of them don't have their own police departments and rely on state police to come in and do those functions for them, which is one issue or another. But at the end of the day, it does mean that there already is this tendency of centralization that we're seeing, and the political legal forms, this is the core of this whole discussion. These are the political legal forms that we have. All of these little cities and their governments, they are wholly inadequate to deal with the situation that's presented to us. One of the questions I have up here is, what are some issues that we're facing that this stops us from facing? And we're already starting to get at that, but in specific, I want us to think about like climate change. Huge thing that we all have to deal with. It's still on?
It's a new one.
It's still on.
It's not.
Wired. We got wires and stuff. That's okay. I got it. We got wires and stuff. So climate change, one of these huge things. Public safety. Yes, it's a thing, and people got to deal with it somehow. And right now, the crutch that's being used is the state police, which is also not actually helping the problem. It's making it worse. Another one I can think of is we were talking about this historical development of Pennsylvania and its municipalities and how we got here. And we talked about like settlers came here and they did agriculture. And then that whole agricultural thing stopped happening. And then a lot of those people became workers. And then we did that whole deindustrialization thing, which we can see, for instance, in this picture over here. I tried to pick some pictures to represent different parts of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. We're all facing a lot of different kinds of problems in the particular, but they all have a lot of the same stems. And these counties and the way they're set up are preventing us from actually taking the steps to solving those problems. I don't have how they relate to all of one another in my head. And all I can come up, not all I can come up with is, but most of the things I can come up with is, you know, my silly little life and how I have to go in between Delco and Philly every day. But like, and Bianca and I have had this conversation many times. I have to take 3 transits to get to work every day, and it takes an hour and a half one way. And I have to go north to the L on a bus, and then I have to go on the L to 69th Street, and then I have to switch to the suburban rail and get on the trolley and then go another 30 minutes out to Media. And like, that sucks in the first place, but if you look at the map, it's like, it's a 20-minute car ride. And it's not because like, it can't be done. I can tell you exactly what they could do if the county boundary didn't exist, is they could take the 13 trolley and just take it all the way down Baltimore. They could do that, but they won't. And part of that problem is not just SEPTA exists as a company and it's bound by these legal restrictions, which means it has to move its money around and do certain things to make certain people happy, which is all true. But the flip side of it is capital isn't bound by these lines. Capital can move wherever it wants, and it centralizes all this information, and it takes all of these investors who have ownership in things like SEPTA or ownership financial institutions, which then fund places where people would work. The deindustrialization thing means that those capitalists, the capitalist class, did their calculations, decided to remove all of those people from the workforce and leave them with nothing. And then play on them by telling them, no, that's your fault, or it's someone else's fault. It's not our fault. And I guess what I'm getting at with the way this is set up is that it's a very convenient mask for capitalism to say that it is fair and democratic and that people are making their own decisions. But behind the screen, the way that money moves is not democratic. Neither is the way they actually govern. Okay. Those were my SEPTA brain thoughts. Does anyone want to take a crack at thinking about how we have to get past this county thing to deal with, like we were saying, climate change? Or I don't know if reindustrialization is the way forward. I don't know if that's even a thing, but in the case of, for example, reanalyzing where around here needs to work together to make it all work for all of us. What are some of the ways that we might think we can make that happen? What's going on in Lancaster? What's going on in Lehigh Valley? What's going on in Delaware?
Oh, I don't have any answers to those questions. But so are you basically saying that the reason they don't just run a bus down Baltimore is because they're trying to contain transportation costs to the greatest possible degree within Philadelphia's city limits and by minimizing the number of cross-county transitways?
I don't know if I'm specifically saying that. I don't know if I'm specifically saying that, but I can see that happening. I guess this point that I wanted to make with the separate thing is just that it's not impossible to run a trolley line or a bus line down. They could do it. They choose to.
Yeah, Baltimore is like a huge prepare. So I mean, as it is, we're gonna require like fixing the problems of capitalism are ironically like capital intensive, right? Like things like massive public transit, massive energy grid modernization, you know, improved access to healthcare, improved access to transportation in general, efforts at, you know, carbon capture, you know, what might even be called geoengineering, but not in like the dystopian capitalist sense. Right? These are incredibly large scale political projects that cannot be undertaken with atomized hoarded capital. They can only be taken care of by the collective wealth of our entire society, right? And so when we let all these little like gremlins hoard all their wealth away, they are stealing not only from broader, they're stealing from broader society, right? And they're hiding their money away in like unaccountable locations, right? Like the counties are of Philadelphia, what the Cayman Islands are of the United States, right? It's just a place to run away, to take your ill-gotten goods and flee and not have to pay anything back.
I've been watching a lot of like there's a lot of good public transportation YouTube videos centered in the Philadelphia area, which I think is very cute. But one of them, Alan Fisher, had a recent video on good urban design for rural communities. Because we think a lot of the solutions that we think of are really centered in their own experiences. And like we know what a walkable city looks like and feels like because we have the luxury of being able to be in it. But if you don't have that experience, you don't even know what good street design looks like. Unless you live in a place that was built like pre-car, like 1820s, which there are places in like northern Pennsylvania that have good urban rural design that people just don't realize because they're so used to the Strode model. But one thing that I thought is with the whole capital doesn't care about county lines. Something that I've been thinking about is how cool Reading Terminal Market used to be. Because Reading Terminal Market used to be this like great interface between the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding community, because we had a lot of farmlands and the outposts that were like growing all of the food, and then thanks to the trains, they were able to take their wares into Philadelphia at a reasonable price and sell it for higher prices than they'd be able to sell it to in their surrounding communities and make more money. So the rural environment was able to provide the resources and food for people in the city, and the city was able to provide the capital goods to the people in the surrounding area. But like our current globalization thing, you can buy pears from Guatemala as easily as you can buy corn from Lancaster County. So I think that if we can build more local rural urban connections to make people realize that like the people in the city don't want the suburbs to be built and destroy your farm just as much as you don't want them to move out into your idealistic nature community. They just want to be able to get around places. Blah, blah, blah. Like these roads are harming all of us, not just harming you and you're just harming me. Like universalizing our issues because we're all dealing with the same thing. But we think that what we're dealing with is a unique issue to our area. Does that make sense? Yes.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about like the structure of government. And I guess I'm just curious if like, because none of this I think is like a solution, it's more just like thoughts. I'm just curious to hear reactions about it, but it's like, all right, so to Casey's point, climate change. How do we solve issues like that in Pennsylvania? Well, we need to like have a strong force that actually controls and like stops fracking from happening. That's a huge contributor in Pennsylvania. So like, how do we do that? Is it having a strong state agency? Is it having a strong federal agency that's like actually doing that? Is it having like I just don't know exactly what the structure looks like. And I think to Albert's point too, it's like not necessarily about the structure itself, but about like who has the power in that structure. So yeah, I think it's like thinking about it, we're gonna have to just be really creative, where it's like we're gonna redo the entire economic structure of our society, then we also have to be willing to kind of like, you know, maybe dissolve all the municipal lines and start over if we need to, if people are willing to do that. But like understanding how do we keep communities like the strong leaders and deciders about what's happening around them. So yeah, just like lots of thoughts about that, kind of like structure versus like the economic and the political structure and like the land use structure and all that kind of stuff, and like what is the most important part to really be focusing on, because like there's a lot of inhibitors about because of these arbitrary lines, but like yeah, just like think lots of thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I think to Bianca's point, you know, the issue is like, you know, let's say that these people want to threaten our groundwater, our collective inheritance, right? These capitalists. So they're going to start drilling, and we're going to say, you know, no, you're not allowed to drill here. We pass some kind of municipal, some kind of county law, but they're not going to drill in this county. So they're just going to like reincorporate, right? They're going to find some way to find some kind of legal exemption, and they're just going to make it happen. Or they're going to ruin our groundwater from some other adjacent location when they're not bound by these laws, right? And so political victory will have to be fought on multiple fronts, and it's just like cutting the heads off the hide, right? So I think that like whether the question is we solve things at the state or the federal level is in many ways almost a civic thought experiment, right? Because we have ideas of how the system is supposed to work, but at the end of the day, the system is controlled by these capitalists who are going to just find creative ways to manipulate the system that they created constantly and outmaneuver us. And so, I mean, not to be weak, because I think it's completely solvable under socialism, right? But we're going to need to get this revolution if we're going to protect the planet. I forgot what I was going to say. True.
I just have like something that what Bianca was talking about made me think about was just like the sorts of like cultural pride that has arisen out of these borders that have been formed, like through things like sports teams and stuff like that. So I think it will be interesting, like when we do reorganize society, and I'm saying when because I'm hopeful, how things like that will play into those decisions. But ultimately, I think it's going to be democratic, and it's going to be decided by the people whose communities are affected, you know, by that kind of, by those sorts of maybe seeming trivial to some people, but that things that actually do make up big parts of towns and cities.
We're just gonna have one big sports team that throws the ball around.
I am interested to think about, I'm just talking out my ass here, I don't know how this would work or anything, but we all are. Yeah. When I look at like all these little tiny municipalities, you know, like Philly, it's great to make big waves in Philly, because Philly's on a national stage, we do stuff here, everybody hears about it kind of thing. But I also think, okay, well, to the point earlier about how the right wing can be more powerful on the state level because they have, you know, smaller kids, like they kind of have that advantage. Why can't we flip that? And why can't we identify some of these really small, tiny little municipalities that maybe have a couple of socialists out there that are ready to rabble rouse and like pass some, you know, laws on that like very local level that really get people saying like, wow, that's wild that they did that out there and it made a big difference or whatever, you know, like it seems like it would be easier in some of these little tiny places to get like two people in there and you could really like make a big difference. So I don't know, like identifying those places I think could be done significant.
Now we're thinking. Now we're thinking. I think, yeah, something that's central to this is that we are talking about reform toward revolution. We got to try and get in there where we can. But like we talked about at our first class, we were describing the difference between a government and a state, where a government is like the political aspects of what you want to do, but you actually need a state to enforce it. I think that's getting at one of the things that we're trying to talk about with this revolution. Never mind. Bianca does not want to talk. Okay. Bianca, stop talking.
All right, I'm only saying. I think about sports a lot. I don't watch as much as I used to, but just sort of to address that, I think an aspect of political education that is important is talking about culture, how much of it's created by the people who pay for it to, you know, make us think it's indispensable, to sort of draw those lines sort of in our minds to say we're different from Pittsburgh, whatever. One of the things that I think is really great is that you know, I hate the 6-kilometer arena downtown. And I think the people fighting against it are doing a great job of talking about how these things work. You get to learn about the process, but then also like the idea that Josh Harris cares about Philadelphia is BS when you say like, well, he also partly owns a team over here, you know, so the majority owner of the Washington football team, stuff like that. So yeah, I think pointing to how culture is created and the sports teams are like not working and then nor art students and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a really important aspect. That's a piece of this.
Now we're thinking, everyone see that big smile on your face? That's what civics is about. It is about getting people together on a common basis. I think. Sorry, I'm gonna try not to be too off topic with this, but I think Terry's brought up such a good point, and it goes along really well with what we're talking about in this like historical materialist development of holidays in the United States, and going along with that culture and how there used to be this culture of like regional stars. You would go out and you'd have people from Philly playing on the Phillies or whatever, and now you just have like billions and billions and billions of dollars pumped into it
for the gambling, for the arena tickets, for the parking and everything else, just to make money off of it. And it both destroys culture and removes the original purpose of the thing. And so I think we do have to take that part of that and actually say, what, how are we gonna move forward? Can we make new neighborhood basketball teams and start playing in the city together and do this and that, whatever?
Yeah, so I'm still sort of like thinking this through, so my apologies if I'm like long-winded or like not concise. But from my like limited experience organizing in Lancaster County, which is I mean, it's not like a small town by any means, but it's certainly a lot smaller than Philadelphia. It was, I don't want to say it was easier, but it was a lot easier to get in contact with people in the local government. In like even people like state representatives, things like that, were a lot more responsive. And the underlying problem there, too, though, is like mobilizing people's a lot harder because of like the lower population. And a lot of areas too that are not as populated, there are like populations that are like sort of like reactionary, and if you're like explicitly socialist, they might be like, you know, explicitly against you. But I forget, wait, hold on. I'm trying to think through the point that I was trying to do this. But yeah, I think that this was what the previous person was saying about like it is easier to like work with fewer people when you're working in a place that is a smaller town, and it does give you opportunities to say like run for city council or you know, make like it's easier to make a splash in smaller areas. It's, you know, not a ton of people are there and not a ton of people are trying to make a splash there. And I think too the rural areas are definitely underlooked when it comes to organizing, and I think that's definitely being rectified with a lot of great different like organizations. I know Put People First PA in Pennsylvania specifically, and other groups whose names are escaping me at the current moment, but it's definitely something that's like, you know, revolution and organizing the working class and, you know, organizing for liberation, that requires like a majority or a large plurality of the people. And while most people are living in urban centers, I think it's around like 80% live in or around like a metropole or like a larger city. The like, you know, 20-ish% of people that don't, that's still like a whole ton of people. Sure.
Just to add a little bit to that, thinking about that more. So I've been organizing with Chinatown with Noctis and moving in Chinatown Solidarity. And one thing that I've kind of found, we're trying to make like education a part of it, and, you know, like getting people to understand how millionaire developers work, how gentrification works, how it affects everybody. And I will say, you know, like I'm not explicitly identifying myself as a socialist to anybody generally, unless it kind of comes to that kind of topic. But you do find that, like, I was just walking around Northeast Philly today, for example, which is actually where I live, but I was walking around there talking to businesses about it. And overwhelmingly, I mean, just like Northeast Philly is the same as the rest of the city, which is we found people either don't know about it, like kind of aren't really familiar with what's going on. And then you tell them about it and they say, oh, that sucks, you know, like agree, that's terrible. Or they're already like, yeah, I hate that, stupid, you know. And I think that those kind of feelings, whether anybody, however they identify politically, if they're part of a party or whatever, there are a lot of issues that everybody can get on the same page about. And because they all affect them personally, or they at least know that it's part of like a larger thing that's affecting their city or whatever. And so thinking earlier, you know, bouncing off of that and what I said earlier, I look at the municipality thing, the small municipalities. I think it's less about like being like, oh, this particular area seems like it could be a socialist hotbed or whatever. You know, it's not about thinking about it that way, but it's like, where are these fracking projects going?
Yeah.
You know, and do we show up there and say, hey, you know, PSL is here and like, well, we'll do the same thing this community is working for. Or it's not even, maybe not even as PSL, but like, whoever that is kind of showing up and just like working with that community to organize them against that common enemy. And then through that process, you do talk to people and they learn about things and they understand like, oh, I do have power to like stand up against this region that's like something's going on. I'm just kind of rambling now, but it's like, yeah, it's easier to like get people together on a common cause. Like, and you probably are gonna have some Republicans in the mix that hate your region for whatever reason, like you actually, or that don't want fracking in their backyard or whatever the case may be. And it's like through that process, they kind of see like, oh, well, maybe my interests aren't aligned with like the wealthy interests in this country, and they kind of see through that action that, who has their back and who doesn't. And I think that really helps like expand people's horizons politically.
Yeah, so speaking to like the previous 2 points that we just heard, I think that there's like a special kind of alienation that the two-party system creates where, we always see the map, right? The map is mostly red with a little bit of blue. And at the end of the day, it's highly concentrated urban centers that vote Democrat, and it's these not so concentrated rural areas that vote Republican. And granted, like, they still can't win the popular vote and things like that. Like, it's clear that one side is seen as slightly less terrible by broader American society, and then the other side is gerrymandered complete victory, right? But at the same time, there's like an element of like, when you're pursuing the vote of the most capital concentrated parts of the country, aka the urban area, the areas that have the highest levels of government intervention, the areas that have the highest level of economic outflow and inflow, you invariably ignore the more isolated parts of society, right? And so the politics of the city is kind of like the ivory tower overlooking the non-politics almost of the rural areas, right? And so you hear like this idea of like kind of the like liberal elitism, which is a very real thing, right? But it's off-putting because you can see that the political establishment, if you're living in a rural area, doesn't serve rural areas, right? Like what services does the system really provide rural areas? Very few, right? The disproportionate amount of the wealth of our society goes to the disproportionate number of people who are concentrated in urban areas, which is like technically democratic because it's majoritarian, but at the same time, it's incredibly alienating to people who are basically not participating in the system at all. And so I think a lot of people support Republicans, not because they're necessarily evil fascists, but just because they feel like they've been neglected and alienated by the Democratic establishment and by their perceived urban elites and their ivory towers, right? And so what I found is you can talk to a lot of these people and they're like shockingly aware of this power dynamic. Maybe not shockingly aware of this power dynamic. They're aware of this power dynamic, unsurprising. But they just lack kind of the political imagination and political will to understand the macroscopic political picture and do anything about it. So, I think things like QAnon, for example, take off because they provide an alternative explanation to the bullshit explanation that we're given to how the system really works, right? We're told, and it's bullshit, that we are a democracy, that we are, of by and for the people, our government, right? But it's very clear that there is kind of a shadowy deep state, there very clearly is parapolitics occurring where that exists outside of our democratic institutions. And I think that when you remove from any kind of governmental service, it's easier to see that society is governed through parapolitics. And I think that that's something we can push on people. It's like, hey, look, we have something better than QAnon. We can like really
PSL, better than QAnon.
The next drop here. You can use dialectical materialism to actually like figure out what the hell's happening, and you can be, more accurate than Q, and you don't have to like depend on the skies, right? Like there's a way to understand the broader system, right? Just listen. Please.
Like if QAnon became popular overnight, like we can't, like
hard. So one thing that I find super duper interesting, just like my friend's dad, a lot of my friends' parents are the classic like parents. They're like socially liberal, fiscally conservative. They don't think that there's free lunches for anyone. They just want to, make sure that like they are realists, and we know how the world works and what is possible and what is not possible, and everyone is very idealistic. And one talking point that I found useful when I'm trying to convince them of things is just calling back to like some of the history that we weren't really taught. Like I watched a video today on the Kentuckification of America, but like in Kentucky and a lot of Appalachia, which Pennsylvania has like a big Appalachian cultural element, and Appalachian culture is like super radical and leftist. It's like down to the bones. Like they live rough lives. It's all about solidarity. The man comes in, he blows the top off the mountain, he sends you down to the coal mine. 16 tons of coal later, you're $1 older and like farther into debt. So anti-capitalist sentiment like is part of Pennsylvania's cultural consciousness, especially like with the Rust Belt thing. But people don't see that as one of the disconnects I see is they don't see the issue of monopolies. They only see states in government. They don't see states in the private sector. Like they don't see that it's kind of messed up that you don't have any say in like what companies are selling. Like you can vote for who you're going to vote for, but if you don't want Target to sell you like poisonous goods, what are you going to do about it? And one thing I find useful is just pointing out like the disparity between like if you like democracy, because most people who are conservative, they love liberty, they don't want anyone to tell them what to do. You can point out, hey, they're kind of telling you what to do. Like my brother is a big car guy, and I'm like, I understand that you love driving, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to like walk to get groceries or take a bus or something? So like you take an edible and just like get your groceries and like buy for the whole day, as opposed to potentially killing someone. And he didn't think about that before because cars are the ultimate American luxury. They can let you go wherever you want. I want to fight back on your point about rural places not being subsidized or they don't get federal money. They do a lot, but they don't see it as such. Like if you look at densely packed business blocks are the most economically developed place. Like they generate the most tax dollars and make the most work, as opposed to like a lot that's a bunch of parking lots and like a Jack in the Box. Like you can have 1 acre, one Jack in the Box, a bunch of parking. You can have 1 acre, 17 small businesses working together trying to form a downtown core. But because of the governmental system that we have, and the highway department is focused on laying roads at the expense of everything else. Like if you want to build a road to somewhere, it's like sign on the dotted line. If you want to build a trolley line, it's not. I don't know. One thing that really messes me up is trying to show people what is outside of their experience. Because it's one thing to be talking here in our next little like North Philadelphia neighborhood. Not that it's like particularly nice. But like traveling to another area where someone's lived in this community their entire life and they've seen the impact of people coming in with promises and then leaving with money. How do you partner with people on the ground as opposed to just coming into their city council with your social executives and pushing them through? That makes sense.
You're basically saying is yes, the rule. So what you were basically saying, just for clarification, is that while in these places may look rural, run down, and unserviced, they're actually highly serviced, but they're serviced in ways that are kind of like transparent, just like intrinsically expensive, but not necessarily providing a lot of quality of life.
They just don't know that they're right. And so you don't see all the like I don't see all the benefits of having the community, most people not like you, one of the things sorry.
No, you're
One of the little things that Brexit taught me was the EU does this thing where whenever they fund a project, they put up a sign that says the EU paid for this. And they have like a website where they show all the things that the EU has spent money on. If we can show people, this is what the Pennsylvania government has done for you.
Yeah.
It might make it more popular. It might show you, oh, the government can fund things besides what I think it can fund. Like it might be able to host food markets or other stuff like this, provide economic opportunities for farmers in the rural areas. Like, I don't know, more information flow.
information codes one of the big ones. I think that's at the core of what we're talking about with. This is a hypothetical situation in which we can redistribute power, is one of the things that we're talking about, and then the other thing is like the practical, where do we start with it, right? You gotta separate those two in our minds for the first instance, but. Lauren got to her point, which is that I really think that. The way forward is not us saying, here's the solutions and let's get them through the government that we have. It's getting to people, getting them to recognize the state of things, and then getting them to work toward the solutions with the methodology and the way of analyzing the problem. And the struggle comes in all of these different kinds of forms, and it can be for climate disaster. It can be for economic redevelopment in a way that makes sense for the people who live there. And it can be in a socialist way. But like Lauren's saying, not every first time you go up to someone, you're going to be like, we're doing the socialism thing. We're getting like, it's like, no, this is the point that I wanted to get at. Struggling with people on those issues that matter to them are the seeds of socialist governance. If you can organize people on bases that they know affect them and that they can work to change the problem, those bodies can grow into actual democratic organs and institutions in the future. And they will be the bedrock of like how we do the redevelopment when the time comes. So we're talking about these issues of the current state of affairs, the governance that we would like to see things go toward, the steps that we need to get to make sure that we can implement them, and in the process change ourselves, the relations between other people and our relations to the world. And that's what we're talking about with socialist reconstruction. That was a great discussion. Does anyone else have any points on that? Because I am going to go to our last slide, which kind of gets at what we were just talking about with the mass organization study. Yes, one.
I'll just say one last little thing about Chinatown, which is really cool for me. That they have, people aren't aware, they've defeated 2 of these projects previously. And that's what's so cool about it. Like, if you tell people, like even the people you talked about it for the first time, where they're like, oh, well, they want to build something, they're going to build it. And it's like, we can't really do anything about it. Like, well, actually, they wanted to build a baseball stadium in 2000, and they wanted to build a casino in 2008. And because of this community and the solidarity they have and the strength they have to fight this stuff, both times they won. And so, and they're expecting, you know, like, again. So, I mean, I think people seeing that, like, oh, you can actually come together, work for the thing, it seems impossible to build. Really outside of it's outside the electoral system or anything like that, really. It's just organizing people say no to something or say yes to something or whatever. That it is possible. It's been done twice before and we're doing it.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll move into our final discussion slide, which is on non-government statewide players. And this is kind of getting at the current form that these organizations of interest take. And I want to make it clear that this isn't like an extensive or an exhaustive list. This is not a static representation. I'm trying to get at like the poles of our politics right now and how people are trying to deal with these societal issues that we've been talking about. And to me, there are a couple of these strains. And we're talking about issues of democracy, people trying to get a grasp on their rights, education, climate change, and all these other things. There is a fascist contingent in Pennsylvania, big moneyed interests, like Jeffrey Yass trying to destroy public education nationwide. They exist here. They play into this school choice and parents' rights thing that's happening with Moms for Liberty and Moms for America, where they go out to all of these local governments and do exactly what we've been talking about, push through, I mean, Nazi book burning shit, like it, very bad, and it aligns so perfectly with the rest of the right wing's attempts to delegitimize, defund, and destroy public education. You have these new federalist types, and those are both in the political and legal arenas where, and I brought this up at our last session as well, there is such a thing called the Federalist Society, which is like this right-wing constitutional originalist, like lawyer group, networking. They all go to school and grew up together and have a bunch of money and then get into like the highest judgeships and, you know, Alito, Clarence Thomas, and these people, or what's the other one? Justice Roberts, Kavanaugh. They were all members of the Federalist Society, and their mission for the last 50 years has been to roll back the civil rights movement. And they've been using very specific wedges to do it, like abortion, like the trans panic, and like the school choice shift. And the third poll that I have up here is Christian dominionism and the new ableistic Reformation movement. This is a big one, and I'm not going to get into all the details on it, but essentially, I was talking about the Federalist Society, and they're like this very law and order focused fascist strain, right? And then there's this Christian evangelical, you know, like kind of, not every one of the new ableistic Reformation churches are the same denomination or even belong to an organization, but they follow these tenets that basically say there are 7 mountains of society. That's the economy, politics, education, media, the news, and a couple more that I can't remember off the top of my head. And essentially what their project is to get their people into the leading positions in those 7 categories and essentially pave the way for what they think is, you know, the end of times, the coming back of Christ or whatever. And they are at the forefront of pushing a lot of this right-wing stuff through hand in glove sort of exchanges, because they're not very open about it or upfront about their projects, and they draw a lot of big names. That Mastriano guy, the guy who was running for governor, he has like weekly prayer sessions with these people in his office in the Capitol every week. One of their main people in Pennsylvania, the new ableistic Reformation movement, has meetings with like a team of state senators every week. Like, these people are really trying to advance their interests, organizing the way they see fit to try and bring about their solutions to the problems as they see it. And what I'm saying is they're not going to stop doing that, and we have to do that as well. Like, we have to be as serious as they are. Okay, great. One of the polls. Another poll, status quo. People who want to keep the system the same, right? These are NGOs, nonprofits, people who want to get out the vote exclusively and tell you that if you don't vote, or if you vote wrong, or whatever, that you're like a bad person who's destroying the country.
All you have to do is vote.
Or all you have to do is vote, or all we have to do is like go and fight for the right jobs and just like a little bit better, and we'll get there and we'll all make it through. They don't seek to answer the questions that are like actually facing us on the global scale. They don't even care about issues that face us on the regional scale. It's just like, shut your eyes and it'll be okay. That's essentially what it is. Okay. And then progressive forces, people who do recognize those contradictions in society and are willing to fight for it to be better and change social relations, not just for their personal gain or for the gain of their perceived in-group or whatever, but to actually take on the forces of capital and usher in a new world where people's needs are met instead of profit in the first instance. And people like this, like Shane said, Put People First PA, amazing group. They're part of the Poor People's Campaign for a Moral Revival that Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King started back in the 60s, and they're still going. Climate activist groups like in Delco and Montco, you'll see these older like Quaker groups who get together and say no more to Vanguard, which is the financial investment firm that puts all of its money into extracting oil around those places. those are the people we can tap into, and not specifically, and also I want to say. Polls, right? These are not like, all of these groups are monoliths. There are people within each of those groups that are at different places individually, but. Anyone else got any examples or want to say anything about this? Because I think we're about ready to wrap up.
Yeah, just real quick, I think like the main forces, the forces of control are obviously the forces of status quo. And right now they seem to be paying lip service to stopping the fascist wing, but seem much more in action, more focused on stopping progressive forces. You could look at like the 2016 and 2020 Democratic primaries and the like urban more like progressive candidates. You can look at and I mean the Democratic Party, of course, is a government organization and it's part of the government and it's not. But like a lot of the nonprofits are in the Democratic Party orbit. Like a lot of these status quo like NGO, like they're like Planned Parenthood and of course Planned Parenthood does provide like services. But yeah, a lot of these groups definitely aren't really combating fascism in the way that they might say that they are. And the other thing is that progressive forces, I think, aren't in some contexts aren't even necessarily forces against capital. So like say this like the movement for this arena in Chinatown or against the arena in Chinatown rather. I mean, a lot of it is being led by like the business class in Chinatown, which like they technically are like a force of capital. Now they're not like big B bourgeoisie or anything. They're definitely like still small, and their interest in this particular context is against like capital as a whole. But it's still like a progressive movement. So I think like it's always important to analyze like who are our enemies and who are our friends. Like obviously the fascists like irreconcilable, can't be worked with. There might be like people in the rank and file within the status quo that might like on a like in poorer situations might side with the progressives over the fascists, and also people in the camp who might do the opposite. So like keeping tabs on these things and really like figuring out who is where, I think is very important.
Yeah, that's fine. I also think going along with like who are part of these movements is also like, especially within the progressive space, like who are the faces of these movements and who are like primarily behind generating, access and generating more interest in particular issues. Like I think climate change, of course, is the biggest issue that is facing humanity today. Everywhere in the world, of course, everybody's affected by climate change in some way. But I've also, just from my own experience in the climate activism groups that I've worked in, the majority of the volunteer base and the majority of people who are out there in the community doing whatever were all white people. And so it was like, do these people really reflect who is predominantly affected by the issues that we're serving? No. And so I think it's also really important to make sure that these movements are accessible to not only people who have time to do it, because when we look at hierarchy of needs, like experience of the families that we serve, like they're working all the time. They don't have time to volunteer, they don't have time to like dedicate precious hours of their day to causes that do affect them, but also it's just they have more important things. They have health to look over their children. I also think it's in like building a movement that can serve everybody, that everybody can benefit from. It's definitely important to make sure that the center of those movements are the folks who are affected the most.
One quick thought in response to that is, I wonder, think about the history of the right, where a lot of organizations front of the churches. So there are, in addition to this, there are ways to get people where they will go. They're busy, they gotta take care of their kids, they're gonna go to church. Or they gotta go to this, something like that. I wonder if there's like a way to think about that sort of alongside what you're saying, centering certain people. I think we agree. And then the second thing is what's important to me about the sort of progressive elements outlined here is that there's vision. What gives me the most focus when I hear a vision for an alternative, because I'm thinking one thing that people really don't say enough about school choice is that, you know, like the fascists don't have to turn school into like a very specific thing to get what they want. School choice, they didn't have to make school chaotic. It is not in their best interest to have like guns outside of school. It's not in their best interest to have like the parents' rights groups like stand down in schools. They just need to make school chaotic so that people will vote to get government money so that they can put their money where they think their kids will be safest. So yeah, I think about that a lot. Like maybe they want to think, but I think you said like hand in glove. Like there are people who might want a very specific vision, but there are other people who benefit from general chaos. And that's what happens exactly. That just kind of adds to people.
Which historically has not worked out well for anybody on the right. Always spirals out of control. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you all for a very fruitful discussion. Thank you all for coming for part 2 of the civics class for radicals. And I hope you'll all join us in 2 more weeks for our 3rd and final part on socialist reconstruction in Philadelphia and the political climate. No, not climate. What did I say? Ecosystem. Political ecosystem. We'll talk a little bit about this kind of discussion here in the city. And speaking of visions forward, socialist reconstruction. My final word on this whole project is we do have to be looking forward, but the reality is going to take shape based on what happens. And so we can't make too many predictions, but we ought to get our thoughts straightened out before the rubber hits the road. So thank you all. You all did amazing. Thank you all for making this work today. Hi, Justin. Thanks.